Another thing I would mention from the perspective of the history of nature, so you may not know, but in the early 1970s, Nature was actually split into 3 distinct journals. So for a short period of time, for about 18 months, Nature was experimentally divided, if you like, into 3. So there was Nature New Biology, Nature Physical Sciences, and then Nature itself. And then essentially what you had was the different parts of Nature were published on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And what I find quite interesting with the titles of these 3 publications is the Nature New Biology. So remember that I was talking about the 1970s. This was really the boom time of molecular biology, and I think the fact that the editors at the time thought the journal should be called New Biology really reflects the fact that the developments in science itself, and the fact that everyone was very excited about this blossoming of indeed new approaches to biological sciences, very much as the true exciting and dynamic development within the physical sciences happened a bit earlier in the 20th century. So really sort of the beginning, in the first half of 20th century, if you like, and then we sort of moved towards era of biology, and arguably I think things are now a little bit more equally spread again. The physical sciences have been coming up in force and strength once again on the horizon. So much about history per se. What about Nature today? So of course I very much hope that you all read Nature, at least part of the journal. What you may not appreciate is that in any one year, Nature publishes between 700 to 800 research papers, and about 2/3 of those are within life sciences today. In every issue, there are usually 3 editorials, at least 1 news feature, around 6 to 8 news and views pieces. There's a world view every week, and a number of news stories, which of course are continuously published online before they are fed into the print and an issue format every week. In terms of people, just to have a sense of how much effort and work goes into producing every issue of Nature. So I did a little tally of people who work on Nature, because actually I didn't even have those numbers in my memory. So in terms of the editors, the manuscript editors who handle research papers submitted to Nature, we have 31 of those. We have 19 on the life sciences and 12 on the physical sciences. On the magazine part of Nature, we have 27 news reporters and editors. We have 7 opinions and correspondence editors, 4 editors who exclusively look after the news and views section of the journal. We have 4 other editors that look after correspondence to us, to the editorial office. We have 4 colleagues who focus on the multimedia team. You may be a regular listener of our podcasts or our videos, which are accompany many of the issues of Nature and also can be seen on our YouTube channel. In addition to that, we have 20 sub-editors and about 13 colleagues who work on art and design. And then we have some production colleagues as well. So altogether, it's just shy of 120 people who work on Nature alone to bring you that content every week, and of course online on a rolling basis. In the past, we have published some tremendous scientific discoveries, and we have also published some very impactful news pieces and opinion pieces. In terms of so-called game-changing content from a perspective of science. I would just mention one that I already mentioned, of course, structure of the double helix. We published the paper describing the first mammalian cloning, Dolly the sheep. We published, of course, the public effort to sequence the human genome. We also, much earlier in the history of the journal, published seminal work on radioactivity, understanding what underlies the process. We also published the paper which described the ozone, the hole in the ozone layer over Antarctica, which subsequently led to the whole appreciation of climate change and our impact on that. And in the very earlier years of the journal, we published a number of reports that really uncovered superfluidity, which was really influential in the physical sciences. Now, on the magazine part of the journal, I'll just give a couple of examples. Recently, very recently, we have continued focused coverage on health in the lab. So my predecessor, Phil Campbell, from whom I took over as editor-in-chief on Nature, started our focus on looking at how training and how well-being of early career scientists in the lab unfolds in the sciences. Recently, for example, we've had a lot of coverage on bullying in the lab, but also sexual harassment. I think these are very important issues related to the well-being of scientists, and of course that's absolutely critical for doing science. We also, in 2012, we published something which turned out to be a very influential opinion that really started the discussion on the reproducibility crisis, especially in the biomedical sciences. This was an opinion piece written by a couple of scientists raising issues with reproducibility of preclinical work, which was then subsequently taken up for follow-up, for example, in many biopharma companies. And this turned out to be very influential, and I'll mention reproducibility and transparency, our efforts to drive those forward, which I personally consider as very important. I'll mention this in a minute. Before I mention that, I also wanted to mention a couple of things which we didn't get right. So, of course, no journal, no one person ever gets everything right. So in addition to these impactful both research and comment pieces that we published, we have also published things which I guess we were or not published. We made decisions of which we are less proud. So one entertaining thing I wanted to share with you was, so you're probably all familiar with Pavlov, who is of course most famous for his for what we know today as Pavlovian responses from his experiments on dogs. So we actually published Pavlov's obituary when he was still alive. We also editorially rejected the paper which describes what we now as Krebs cycle, which of course is an absolutely fundamental textbook, biochemistry textbook element. We recently, actually now just over a year ago, published an editorial in response to some, I suppose the best way to describe it is, it was an editorial in response to ethnic unrest in the US associated with removal of statues of individuals who contributed to racial oppression. That editorial inadvertently turned out to be to have caused offense to a number of individuals, especially of African American origin, and we actually had to apologize formally for the editorial, which I feel was a very important thing for us to do. On the research side, we published, I suppose this would have been in the 70s, in the 80s, early 80s, we published a paper describing cold fusion which of course subsequently was debunked. And we also published a paper which described laboratory experimental or claimed to provide laboratory experimental confirmation of homeopathy, which again, of course, is not scientifically verified. So I would say every journal has those aspects, that chapters in its history that it's less proud of, but fortunately Nature has an awful lot to be proud of at the same time. So before I move to talk a little bit about myself and how I got into the role that I hold at the moment, I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about our recent efforts to help researchers publish research which is more reproducible and to make their work more transparent. So those of you who have published in Nature or have submitted in Nature will be familiar, or for that matter, other Nature research journals. So journals such as Nature Genetics, Nature Physics, Nature Chemistry, etc., etc. We mandate data deposition for a number of data types. Broadly speaking, these data types are the ones for which established publicly funded repositories exist. For those, we mandate data deposition. For a number of years, we have mandated a data availability statement. So that statement for data types for which there are no public repositories, for which deposition of which we don't mandate, we actually demand that you as an author make a statement in the paper saying all of the data that you describe in the paper, what the availability, access to those data sets is, where these data are available, and how, if they're not publicly available, how other members of the research community can gain access to these data. We also, for a number of years now, we request reporting summaries, most notably within life sciences, but also in a couple of areas in physical sciences. So in physical sciences, papers that make claims of lasing, so in laser optics, and also in solar cells, in physical sciences, but in life sciences, all papers need to be accompanied by a reporting summary, and this is essentially a summary providing background information on statistics, the types of reagents and materials that were used. All of this is designed to enhance transparency of the work that was done and how the work was done, and by doing so, we try and help reproducibility in science. Another thing which is an important aspect of the reporting summary is, of course, the ethical consent, if there is any work that requires such consent, for example, work with animals or human subjects. The final thing that I will mention most recently that we've become very interested in Nature is surfacing the efforts that our reviewers make towards all of us ensuring that robust, credible research is published in our pages. Of course, Nature, by far and away, most papers in Nature are published following what I would describe as a classic peer review process. And by that I mean that it's a single blinded process, so the referee knows the identity of the authors, but the authors don't know the identity of the referee. And the referee process is confidential. So the only people who know the exchange between the reviewers and the authors are the authors themselves, the reviewers, and the editor who handles the manuscript. I'm sure you are aware of the fact that there is increasing interest among the scientific community to experiment with this model. And so indeed, for example, if you opt for that version, Nature offers you a possibility to have your paper go through double-blind peer review. And although this is only a minority of our authors request that, but this is open to all of the authors. who review with us. At the moment, we have a trial running on Nature, whereby if the authors and the reviewers are interested, we will actually name the reviewers by name in the manuscript itself. If you look at a number of papers within Nature, you can see right at the end of the paper, there is a publisher's note saying that we, Nature, thank reviewer, Joe Bloggs and Mary Smith, and perhaps one anonymous reviewer for help with reviewing the paper. But important to emphasize that this is not mandatory. This is something that both reviewers and the authors can choose to do. It's a trial at the moment in Nature. It's our effort to see to what extent communities are, first of all, ready for that level of transparency in peer review, but to what extent communities are interested in surfacing the very important effort that reviewers make towards ensuring that the publication record is sound. So I will close the part about Nature itself with a quote. There's I think it was in the 90s, late 90s, I think, possibly early 2000s, that a historian of science called Melinda Baldwin wrote a book about the history of Nature. The book is called Making Nature. The reason why the book is interesting is because, of course, to understand the history of the journal is to understand history of science and its communication as well, which I think there's a really interesting parallel there, and I, for one, found the book really interesting. But the quote I want to share with you is something that the book ends on, and the book essentially ends the beginning of this century. And what Melinda Baldwin says is the following. What scientists want from their journals in the 21st century, and Nature's ability to fulfill those desires, will be the factors that shape Nature's future. I find this a very interesting challenge for me as editor-in-chief of Nature. And it is no coincidence, therefore, that at the beginning, when I started my address to you, I said, I'm very interested in your suggestions or criticisms for how Nature is today, because we need to grow with you, with the scientific community, because after all, our main purpose is to serve you and communicate your research that you submit to us. So just a few words about me. So Rana asked me to say a few words about myself. You heard a few facts about my past, so a little bit more perhaps than you heard before. So I was born in Poland, in Warsaw, and I came to the UK to study at university. So you probably heard already that my first degree is actually in genetics. I studied that at University of Nottingham, and genetics was always my passion. So I really was I felt I was an experimentalist from an early age, and life sciences and biology in particular were my real passion. But then when I began to learn about inheritance and genetics at school already, I felt that this was really the most fascinating part of biology that I wanted to know much more about, and ultimately I thought I was going to dedicate my life to. So I came to the UK to study genetics, and so that's my first degree, the topic of my first degree. And then I moved to Cambridge to the MRC Laboratory of Molecular Biology to study sex determination in C. elegans. And my drive to study, so C. elegans, of course, is a classic genetic model organism. Again, it was a very focused, my methods for my study during my PhD were very focused on genetics and, of course, molecular biology. But the reason why I was interested in studying this particular topic is I was fascinated by the type of question that I really went to address. You might think, oh, why is it interesting to understand how sex is determined in some microscopic see-through worm that lives in the soil all around, And incidentally, if you happen to like raw mushrooms, you probably consume quite a lot of C. elegans because they quite like to live on mushrooms themselves. So why did I want to study that? To me, it was a fascinating intellectual problem. So just very briefly, for those of you who don't know, C. elegans doesn't have a sex chromosomes like we do. Its sex determination system is based on counting. So hermaphrodites rather than females, but that's just a technicality really, they have 2 X chromosomes and males have 1. So essentially a newly fertilized egg, a zygote, has to count how many chromosomes, X chromosomes it has, and in fact what it actually counts is the ratio of its X chromosomes to its autosomes. And if you think about it intellectually, it's a very interesting problem because you have to translate, a biological system has to translate a quantitative signal into a qualitative output. So how you make a hermaphrodite, which is morphologically distinct and from a male. So that was a broad question that fascinated me. And of course, as always is the case, what I ended up studying was just one specific aspect of that problem. I then went on to do a postdoc at what was then called ICRF, Imperial Cancer Research Fund, here in London. Now it's called Cancer Research UK, but it's a charitable organisation which performs a lot of basic research, but all of it also is geared towards trying to understand biology of cancer and sort of overgrowth, essentially. And there I studied aspects of stem cell differentiation within the gut epithelium. Again, very much using genetic models, this time invertebrates rather than invertebrates, so mouse, zebrafish, and so on. But the reason why I, in the end, decided to leave research science was a reason which is very common to scientific editors. I already alluded to this when I was describing to you what I studied for my PhD. So I said I was interested in the broad question, in the concept of how that sex is determined in C. elegans. And yet, of course, naturally, in my PhD, I was focusing on one particular aspect of it. And it was necessarily that need which all of you have in research to focus and zoom in, especially to begin with, on very specific questions, which ended up frustrating me in the lab. I didn't want to focus so much, I didn't want to exclude so many other topics that fascinated me in science, and that's actually what led me to become an editor. In the interest of time, I won't go through too much of my background. You heard a little bit about what my various stages of career, editorial career, but I would just say that it's for those of you who may be considering a career not in academic science, but perhaps being that facilitator of science dissemination, which I think what editors are. I will say that it's a tremendous career to choose, and I have certainly, I have felt that I have made, as an editor, I have made a greater contribution to disseminating science than I would have done had I stayed a researcher myself. I realize we have about 15 minutes before the end of the hour that we have allotted. I think I will stop here and open for any questions that there might be, because I would really like us to have an opportunity to have a bit of a discussion here. Over to you. Are there any questions about anything I've said or anything that I haven't said, anything at all?
Well, thank you very, very much for the talk. Yeah, that was very, very informative. And now we have some questions, and we'll follow up with some few comments. Yes, please.
Can I talk from here or?
Yeah, okay.
You can speak from here. Okay. Thank you so much for your lecture. It was very interesting. This is Ala Ftaiha. I am a physical chemistry professor from the Hashemite University. Actually, I have two questions. The first one regarding the Nature Middle East. Like, there is no contacts to send any email or to try to contact with the editor or the editor-in-chief of the Nature Middle East and try to contact Nature itself through the phone, through the website, and they don't provide me with any information. So I hope if you can help me in this point. The second point, I hope that I'm not offensive. Like, I feel Nature accepts articles from like prestigious places. Like, if you send an article from Jordan or from like Morocco, you will not have a big chance to get accepted. And also they focus on some political issues or like some issues related to gender discrimination. Like, they feel these topics are very excited and it's very easy like to deal with these. But if like you write something like about dissemination like in high impact journals from the poor countries or third world countries, they will not consider it as like a very important issue. And actually 4 weeks ago I submitted a correspondence to Nature, and yesterday I got rejected because they said they just have a limited space to publish articles. And this is very like make me frustrated. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So these are really important questions. So with regards to your first question, I actually can't answer your question about the email address on Nature Middle East specifically right now, because I don't have it in front of me. There ought to be a contact for that. And I'm very sorry to hear that if you try to contact that address, you don't hear back. What I would say is, so if you don't get a response from them, you can always email nature@nature.com. From that address, for sure, you will get an answer, or you will be forwarded to a specific person. Okay. So we should be answering any emails that we receive, with whatever comments for whatever reason. It may take a little while to get to the right person, depending on what the nature of the comment or the query is, but we certainly should be responding to your questions. That's absolutely something that would be my expectation. With regards to your second question, so there are really two parts to your second question. The first one is about, effectively what you were asking, is there a geographical bias to who gets published in Nature, whether it's in the magazine part, if you submit a correspondence or a comment, or whether it's in the research part. The statistics of who publishes in Nature, as in where the authors come from, almost certainly to nobody's surprise, show that most of our authors come from the so-called global north. So they come from North America and Europe, and some parts of Asia, although by far and away most of our authors come from North America and Europe. It is no coincidence that those parts of the world also receive the greatest science funding. Science, especially today, is a very expensive business, and I've just said something which all of you know intimately well, firsthand. So the fact that most of our authors come from that part of the world is actually not a reflection of our own geographic bias. It's a reflection of another bias which exists in where science is done and how science is funded. And these are the statistics that I think you will all also appreciate. I can tell you quite honestly now that we are actually very interested in surfacing research which is done not in the so-called global north. Of course, when it comes to publishing research papers in Nature, what is the most important criterion when editors consider a paper is the impact of this research, the degree to which that research is advancing knowledge in the field, but for Nature in particular, that advance also has to spread more broadly to the scientific community, so it's not just a niche finding, but has a broader implication. And often things that we take into consideration is elegance of the science that is being reported. So it really is the quality of the science itself that is by far and away the single most important factor in us considering the research. It is also true that whether you talk about primary research paper submission or any other type of submission, for example, comment or correspondence, the vast majority of our submissions end up being rejected because we do have limited space in the journal. We are a very highly selected journal, both in terms of research and in terms of magazine parts, magazine content. With respect to the things that we write about, so for example, that our journalists cover or that we write in our editorials, if you had been the proverbial fly on the wall in our editorial meetings, you would have seen that I and others very often surface the fact that we do not have even coverage, geographic even coverage. I would love to cover more issues related to science or specific science issues in our news and editorial coverage, issues that come from the so-called global south. So the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, etc., etc. I would love to do that. So, you know, this is my plea to you, for example. If there are things happening around you that you're aware of, that you feel Nature should be writing about, then do let us know. We strive continuously to surface those issues, to identify them and write about them. Of course, we don't always hear about them in a timely fashion, so we certainly would. And one final comment to your question, you were talking about us focusing on gender bias. In general, we feel very strongly about diversity in research. That's, of course, research and scientific life is our focus. We feel very strongly about diversity. Now, gender diversity and gender balance is, of course, one aspect of diversity. As I like to say, diversity itself is diverse. We have begun by focusing on gender diversity because we felt that one has to start somewhere. It also is simpler to collect data on gender diversity and gender balance and therefore measure the success of our own efforts. It's much more difficult to do this with, for example, ethnic diversity. It's easier to do with geographic diversity, but more difficult to do with ethnic diversity. That is not to say it is not something that we want to do in the future. So we're very aware of these issues.
Actually, thank you for your answer. And one thing that would be really interesting to write about is that in the Middle East, actually a higher percentage of females in the STEM fields, in academia, as undergrads, even graduate students. And this is something actually that was pointed out, and Nature published it, just to be fair to Nature, in the book that I wrote, 5 Scarves. We talked about this, and it was highlighted in the journal, I really thank you for covering the book, which talks about a perspective, as you mentioned, and as the professor mentioned, from the Middle East. And I just want to tell the audience, you also have that worldview column.
That's right.
That is usually out there, and everybody, I mean, whenever I send, they publish it. And I always recommend people to send, and some actually scientists in Saudi Arabia, a female, she published in it as well. So I think it's just getting the word around, networking, sending emails, and actually this encounter with you today will hopefully open a lot of doors.
But you know, I can't find out of these features on the website, like worldview. Where can I submit worldview through the Nature website? I can't find it.
No, you can't. I'll show you.
Okay.
Email.
Okay,
no, you can't. There are, but you have to look. You have to dig. Maybe it's not so friendly, user friendly. I don't know. But yeah, and I also want to mention another thing that we do here at the university, and just to encourage others, we use all the news, the short news that you could subscribe to, and you get a list of the latest news in Nature, and Nature also covers editorials on what's happening around the world, in the world of science. Maybe they wouldn't have published it, but they can tell us what's going on around. And actually in my students, every week, every student has to present one of those pieces of news. So they get Yeah, so they get to understand what's going on. They don't have to read the highly professional, detailed article. They just read that news piece, which is one paragraph. And especially because English is a second language for all our students, that paragraph is very nicely written in layman language that helps our students to access the information. And then even after they graduate, they have something to refer to. So thank you. And the other thing we use from Nature is the special edition part that you create every month, at least once or twice a month, every 2 months. Those are really special because, again, they're not so detailed. They're a more general overview of the topic chosen. And I actually use it with my graduate students. So we read it back to back and we have a discussion. And the nice thing about it is it doesn't just cover the science, it covers the implications of the science on economy, on politics, on everyday life of people. So those are great. So we would maybe like to suggest topics for those special editions. And
sure, absolutely.
Yeah, and another section of Nature I think that's also important is the career section. And this is new. And this is really helpful because it gives a variety, a range, a diverse spectrum of what careers are out there, what challenges are there, what solutions. And also maybe we would like to suggest from the Middle East our perspective on careers because the dynamics of the work frame in Jordan and the Middle East is a little bit different. So maybe we could shed some light so that your general reader could understand what's going on and maybe benefit from what options and opportunities are available in the Middle East in terms of careers.
That's a wonderful suggestion, actually. That we have, amongst the many editors I mentioned who work with us on the journal, we have editors who are dedicated to that section. So I'm sure they will be delighted to hear from you. And of course, Rana, you have my direct contact details. I can put you in touch with those individuals who edit and plan that particular section.
Perfect. And so, for example, last week there was a big conference on cancer care informatics in Jordan. It was the first one internationally in the whole world. So this would be something that we would love to share with Nature, talk about it as a role model. And as the professor said, we are doing things that are really new to the world. It's just that we need to tell you about them and get the communication rolling. Again, back to science communication and having a voice, definitely. So is there any questions, more questions? We have a student here. He told me the question in advance, I'll translate. He's a freshman. He's a freshman, he's studying nursing. And his question is, he says from his perspective that sometimes they're not encouraged, and this is not gender, this is all like the young generation, in some parts, that they're not encouraged to do science, either because there's no time, because, putting the bread on the table is more important, and science sometimes is a luxury. It doesn't pay that much as other jobs and so on. So his question, what is your advice for that? 1. 2, I'm going to repeat what he says to be transparent and authentic to his question. He says that sometimes he hears stories that people are scared to study science because they may be labeled that they're dangerous because they have information. So what's your take on that?
Okay, so I'm going to take the second question first. That's very interesting. It's so interesting how we, as humans, approach the issue of information. And so if you think about it, throughout the history, information has been considered variously as power. It has been considered, indeed, as implied by the question here, as something frightening or something to be wary of. But if you really think about in your own context, each one of you, what information, as you gain information, any kind of information, it could be information about a specific aspect of science, information about politics, information about, philosophy or ethics, any aspect you think about. When I apply this to myself and I think about what is it that information does to me, does it give me power, does it make me frightening in some way, I actually think it liberates me. To me, information, when not restricted, not controlled by some group of people, is actually the most wonderfully liberating thing we can experience. And then we can make our own judgment what we're going to do. So to me, information is liberating. And I genuinely feel that very strongly, and that's across all walks of my life, not just in my professional life. Now, with respect to choosing science as a profession, of course, economic drive is very difficult for me to comment. Everyone's circumstances, I beg your pardon, are different, and what you choose to do for a living has consequences for you and your family, and of course that's understandable. I would like to see the world in which being a researcher, doing science, is considered a bona fide profession which you can pursue for the general betterment of humanity, whether it's just by increasing our collective information about the universe around us and within us, for that matter, or whether for some direct applied purpose. You know, the person who asked the question is a student of nursing. That's a very applied, specific profession, an aspect of science and investigation to be following, something which, as the information grows, we are able to better support our patients. And of course, there are many other examples like this. So I would like to see that researchers are considered to be, say, bona fide professionals who can practice their profession freely in a way that allows them to do it as the main occupation. Most of the time, research science is not a profession into which you go in order to make money. There are many other professions, of course, which pay much better. Just in case you're wondering, becoming an editor of a journal is also not a profession to go into to make money. It's actually very similar to staying in academic research in that respect. But in my case, it happens to be a passion, and I wouldn't change it for anything else. Perhaps I could have a bigger house if I had chosen something else, but I really doubt I would have been happier. So that's my answer to you.
Thank you very much. Oops, sorry. That's great. Any other questions? But I want to comment on also other things like we've created, especially for gender diversity, we've created a mentoring program in Jordan for female scientists. We actually got a peer award for it, and it's about it's more about peer-to-peer, a holistic approach of senior and junior scientists mentoring each other, helping each other, advising each other. We started it for women, and it ended up for both men and women. And actually, it was featured on Science, in Nature, in the blog for careers as well. But these are things that we may write more about, expand more, share stories, because stories are powerful, as you mentioned in the beginning. And I also want to mention the statistics that I had asked you, Nature, to give us about the Middle East in terms of publishing in the last 5 years. So do you mind if I quote those, or do you have them?
Go ahead, please.
So we had asked for Magdalena to share with us the number of research articles published in Nature in the last 5 years from the Middle East, meaning the authors are from the Middle East. No, the institutions are from the Middle East, because an author could be Arab and living in Germany. So if we found out there were 53 articles that were published in the last 5 years from the Middle East, where the affiliation, the institution is from the Middle East. 24 came from Saudi Arabia, 6 from the UAE, 4 from Morocco, 4 from Egypt, 4 from Qatar, and 4 from Lebanon, 2 from Tunisia, and 2 from Oman, and 1 from Algeria, 1 from Sudan, and 1 from Jordan. And I'm proud to say the one from Jordan is actually the one I published.
Are these just research articles?
Yes, research.
Okay.
This is like,
because I have also another statistics here. So like in Jordan we just have 5 in the last 5 years. Okay. From Saudi Arabia there is like a lot. I think 120. Like I'm talking about all of nature and science here. Like cows, they published 33 articles. Cow, they published 59 articles. Algeria, I think.
This is between nature and science.
Between nature and science.
And I'm quoting only science, nature science.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're just proud that the one in the last 5 years from Jordan is from our university, the Hashemite University. And of course, it's not research in my lab has done alone. It's a consortium. And as we all know, that big, real good science now is not done by a small team. The big challenges require big groups and big teams of multinational, multidisciplinary teams, and this was a huge team of working on ancient genomes and migration between Europe and Asia. But we're proud of it, and that's why we mention it. All right, so any other questions, comments? All right, we don't have any, but we thank you very much, Magdalena, for your time, your advice, sharing your personal story. And actually, we're very proud that you're the first female editor on Nature in the past 150 years. So
thank you.
That's
thank you. Thank you very much. It was my real pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. And perhaps I can offer, if there are any subsequent questions that come up, perhaps, Rana, if you agree to mediate this, I'll be happy to answer them by email. Let's say if you send in questions by the end of the week, then if there are further, I'll be happy to answer them.
That would be wonderful. Perfect. We will do that.
Great.
And do you mind we recorded the session if we put it up on our university channel? Is that okay? Or shall I email you separately?
I think that should be fine.
Okay, perfect. Because we want a wider audience to benefit from your talk. Right. Well, great. Thank you very much. And we hope that there will be other meetings. We've had people from your staff in the past give tutorials to my grad students on writing and things. So maybe we'll follow up on that as well going forward. Thank you very much.
Sounds better. Thank you very much for the invitation.
You're
Bye-bye.
welcome. Have a good day. Bye-bye.